Hello my dear friends. In this video I will present to you two scary and interesting stories. Please stay with us. Here is story 1. One night, the father and daughter were driving on a deserted road, returning home after spending the whole day visiting the girl's sick mother in the hospital. They were all the way listening to the sound of rain knocking on the roof of the car. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and the father struggled with steering wheel, but the car slipped off the flat road and slid to crash into a stone wall. After the father verified that his daughter was not injured, the man got out of the car to check the damage, and each of the front tires had a large hole, and the right side sloped along the wall, and the rest of the car escaped without collision. He told his daughter that we must have pushed something on the road, as there is something that blew both tires. So I asked the girl while she was feeling shivering as a result of the collision, could it be repaired? Right. No, her father answered, shaking his head. I've only got one piece in reserve, and so I'll have to go back to town and find someone to tow the car. It's not far from here. Wait in the car while I go. Well, said the girl reluctantly, and she added, but please don't take too long. I'm afraid to sit here alone in the dark. The man could see in his daughter's eyes she was scared. Don't worry, her father answered, and closed the car door, saying I'll be back as soon as possible. His daughter followed him in the rearview mirror. He was walking on the road in the pouring rain, and then he disappeared into the night. More than an hour passed and her father had not returned. The girl began to wonder what would have taken him any longer. She was very worried because he should have come back by now. At that time, she noticed in the rearview mirror a figure in the distance, and he was walking towards the car. At first, she thought it was her father, but when she turned to take a closer look, she realized it was a strange man. He was well dressed and had a big bushy beard, and he was holding something big in his left hand, swinging back and forth. Something made her very nervous. As he got closer, he stares at the back window and traces her eyes. In the dim light, the girl guessed that what he was holding in his right hand was a large, sharp butcher's knife. When she looked back again, she saw that the strange man had stopped in front of the car and stared directly at her. Suddenly, the man raised his arm and the girl screamed wildly. He was holding in his left hand her father's severed head. She was screaming and screaming without stopping. She felt that her heart stopped and she was struggling to breathe. The strange expression on her father's face was terrifying. His mouth was hanging open and his eyes retracted in his head. When the man reached the car, he turned his face up and down against the closed window with his darkened eyes, a hideous face covered with deep scars. For a moment, he smiled. He smiled maliciously, then reached into his pocket and began to take something out of it and slowly lift it with his left hand. Translated from the story, Car Keys. Story 2. Many are the ones who love dolls and love to have many of them, especially the huge ones, with which you feel like a human being, kneeling next to you. But who among us wondered before? Who owned the doll before him? Or what did the doll's eyes see before it reached your hands? Have you ever wondered what happened to the doll before? Did the events that the doll saw affect her? Given that inanimate objects are living beings like us. Here is our story. The beginning. The events took place since their inception in the state of Japan, specifically in the year 1918 AD, where one of the exhibitions for the sale of old property, such as what is known to us as the Rubabakia market. And while he was wandering in the market, a 16-year-old boy called Aikishi Suzuki bought a doll from this exhibition for his 2-year-old little sister as a nice gift for a little girl. And indeed, the little girl was overjoyed with that special gift. But what about the doll? The doll was made of porcelain and was about 40 centimeters long, and its head was adorned with black hair, and it had black eyes that had no walls, and the bride wore the kimono that was characteristic of the Japanese. Her name is also Akayako. Suspicious events. Shortly after acquiring the doll, the child fell ill with a severe type of influenza, as her temperature rose and she suffered sporadic convulsions, which caused her to lie in bed for long periods of time. The child died suddenly. Of course, the family of the child collapsed severely after her death. And of course, the Akayako doll was the only souvenir for the child after her death. And it was placed in a special place inside the house for the sake of their child. And they stayed next to her for hours and surrounded her with incense and flowers and supplications, and always they arrived next to her. But after a short period of this, the people of the house noticed something suspicious. The doll's hair began to grow like her, like any real child. So the family members tried to cut the doll's hair, as the little girl did before her death. But they noticed that it had grown longer in the next month. So the family members decided to send a sample of the hair to a laboratory for analysis and to find out what was happening. So the shocking answer came from the laboratory that the hair's real. It is not artificial. So the family members decided to send a doll to a temple in Hokkaido. And there the priests inside the temple kept the doll. And the temple goers kept flocking to it and praying for the deceased girl. And at the same time the priests cut the hair of the doll. Every year at the same time. The story is not over yet. In the current years, the family members decided to examine the doll's hair again. And a new sample was sent after the tremendous development that took place in forensic medicine. Of course, there is a difference between the results from 1938 AD and the current year. And indeed, the laboratory confirmed that the hair was human. And it was for a 10-year-old girl. She died when she was young due to a genetic disease. But no one knows the details of her death. It is worth noting that the doll was placed in a wooden box, and it is still displayed inside the temple to this day, and tourists come to visit it permanently, with the continuation of the ritual of cutting the hair of the doll every year. But was Akayako talking to the doll, or to the real hairy girl? And is it possible that the doll carries a part of the soul of the child that possessed it? All are confusing questions. But the most important question remains, which is how many children saw porcelain eyes before the complete doll settled inside the temple? No one knows yet. If you like the story, do not forget to support us by liking and subscribing. Thanks and bye.